Hey everybody, Nick here, and today do a little disassembly maintenance for you on this little guy. This is the Chris Reeve Knives Impinda pocket knife. So first off, this is my fourth disassembly of this knife. Mind you, I haven't filmed them all, but this is a knife that I have absolutely 100% taken apart a bunch of freaking times now. The reason for that is relatively simple. The very first time, and by the way, I'm going to go ahead and use a 2mm, hold on. I'm going to organize things over here. Go ahead and use a 2mm Allen key bit here on all of these things. And I appreciate, by the way, very much that you can use the same bit in every place. But still, here we go. Get that loose. Oh, that's right. I come from the other side on this. All right. So, but I have taken this guy apart now a bunch of times, and the reason for that is quite simple. Each time I've tried a different lubrication. I've tried a different grease. This turns out to be a knife that is super sensitive to whatever different kind of grease is out there. And so what we're going to go ahead and do is take this guy apart. I went ahead, I pulled these two screws out, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the back side. But here's the weird thing about this knife. Watch this. As I'm pushing this guy loose, what's actually happening here is that it's free spinning, right? But the funny thing is that the actual screw part of it is the top part. I'm actually turning the base of this guy in there, and that's allowing this shelved pivot here, because the pivot has a little bit of a shelf going on up there, which engages with this shelf right here. That's what's actually coming loose there. So I'm opening it from the top, so to speak, but I'm doing that in a way that's, well, a little different than usual. But anyways, let's go ahead and take this guy apart. And what we can see in here is that I've been working this guy pretty good. It's starting to wear itself in a fair amount, but yeah. So one of the things that's always a little scary with a slip joint knife is that they're difficult to take apart, right? Historically speaking, the issue is that you've got this spring in here, right? And the spring has the downside, usually, of, well, causing a fair amount of trouble, because you have to push that spring back out of position in order to get the blade put into position. And so that's kind of that can be a troublesome thing. Go ahead and clean this guy out here. I'm trying to lift this washer out of here. The washers, as we'll see, are actually in a pocket. Come here, washer. Being very careful here not to deform the washer particularly, but there we go. So I can tug that loose. What we can see here is that the washer itself lives in this little recessed pocket. That's actually a brilliant thing, or at least I think it is, because, and the reason for that is that this allows the washer to sit closer into the inside of the handle there, and allows there to be very little gap at the top of the knife, so it looks a lot more like a traditional sort of slip joint, even though it's running on phosphor bronze washers. That's probably the nicest thing in terms of the overall sort of, I don't know, that's the thing that feels most innovative about this guy, although I'm sure it's been done elsewhere. Here we can see this is the Bill Harsey signature there. So there's that. Next thing, let's go on ahead and pop this guy. Well, not popping anything yet. But the biggest concern with the slip joint is always, will I be able to get this blade back into position if I remove it? You know, because then the spring is going to snap down, etc. However, on this knife, that's actually not proven to be an issue at all. This is actually a very easy knife to disassemble. One would really expect and hope that from Chris Reeve, which is one of very few companies in the world, actually, that gives you, along with the knife, that gives you a little the tool to disassemble it with, along with some grease, along with some Loctite. So I appreciate very, very much that Chris Reeve was, that Chris Reeve Knives has designed this guy for disassembly, but that is definitely, that's a big perk to this guy. In fact, that's the great, so to speak. Let's go ahead and lift out the back spring here. Pop this guy loose. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Lift out the back spring. That'll just allow me to clean that off a little bit. This disassembly right now is not, strictly speaking, super necessary. It's running okay right now. It's not running amazingly, but it's running pretty decent on the Chris Reeve grease, and it's been wearing itself in over time. This is a knife who on day one the action was tragic. And I throw the pivot onto the floor. Come here, pivot. Hold on. Getting under the desk here. If you're lucky, you caught a hint of Batman here right there. Anyways, but on day one, the action was really bad. And, you know, as I've used it more, it's smoothed out a little bit. And I even went and compared it with one at a store. It's about where it is. But anyways, So I'm cleaning off the pivot here, and you can see that I am getting a fair amount of gunk out of here. I think it is smoothing out and wearing in, which is what you'd expect, right? But yeah, this has been a learning experience, so to speak. Getting this knife running good has taken a little bit of time. So again, I'm cleaning off this fluoro grease here. I'll put a little booze on it here. If you're ever curious about any of the tools I'm using for disassembly, go ahead and check out nickshabazz.com/tools. Although it's worth noting that, again, I could just be using the Allen key that they provide here, as well as, and I'll be using the fluoro grease that they provide. And so this is actually a knife where you need very little of the tools that I usually use. I happen to be using my normal screwdriver here just because I'm used to it, but that could work just as well. And everything else is just rubbing alcohol I'm putting on this. Again, you've got the Idaho made on the inside, which is unusual. Usually it's on the outside, right here. So this is a small Shabazz right in the corner here. But okay, now finally I'm going to want to clean off the washers. And the washers are, again, coated in the fluoro grease. But we can see here that I am, I'm removing a little bit of metal dust on here because this is wearing itself in. And that's the nature of the knife. And, it will smooth out. And it has continued to smooth out as I've carried it and used it. But nevertheless, there is that. Alrighty. So we'll go ahead and clear this out. Everything else is looking pretty clean in here. And like I said, for the most part, I'm just sort of doing this for demonstration because it was running, well as I got it running beforehand. But okay, now comes the part that could historically be very tricky. And I mean historically with other slip joints out there in the world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the fluoro grease that they give you. This is the same grease, to the best of my knowledge, that they're including with the Shabazz, and as well as other things. Kind of shake it up a little bit. It has a tendency, it's a lot like mustard, right? First time you use it, it just like, that's the technical term. Anyways, so I'll go ahead and I'll put the pivot in there, and that'll just give me something to center that in. I have lost these little guys do love falling out as you're trying to do this, because the clip is still installed. It's worth saying that you don't have to remove the clip, and that the clip itself is removable, and in fact swappable, for the Shabazz clip, which is how I had this guy much of the time that I carried it. But alrighty. Whoa there. Exxon Shabazz got a little out of hand there. Just applying some grease here. Probably a little more than I need to, but you know what? This needs every bit of help it can get, so I'll go ahead and I'll just circle the post there with a little bit of grease. Okay, so then I've put some grease in there. I'll go ahead and I'll drop the washer into place. And I need to make sure that the washer is riding inside the pocket here. That's an important detail. You want to make sure that that's not like bound up outside the pocket, or else you're going to have a bad time. So you make sure that that's there, because the washer doesn't fit exactly around the pivot. Now, next step is going to be, damn it, this came out again. Put this back in place here. All right, next step is going to be to put the back spacer into position. Beautiful. All right, backspace is in. Next step. There's no detent ball hole or anything like that, because there's no detent ball, because there's, well, it's a slip joint. But still, I'll go ahead and I'll drop the blade into place. Now, in order to get this working, all I need to do is just apply a little bit of upward pressure on this spring here. Just lift it at the slightest bit, and that actually put it into place. You can tell there's not a lot of strong spring tension in place here. That's actually a nice thing, and in many ways, that the fact that this has very little spring tension is part of the reason that the pull on it is very soft, but it's also a part of the reason that the disassembly is so easy. That is a source of pain with a lot of slip joints, modern and traditional. That strong pull requires a strong spring, and strong springs need strong bending to get the blade back in place. So I'll go ahead and I'll drop this back into place here. Actually, what I'll go ahead and I'll do is I've kind of coated that area with grease. Then I put a little bit of grease onto the washer itself, and then I'll use that grease to sort of stick it into this little recess here. So that way everything is properly seated in place. Then finally, all I need to do is drop this last bit right onto position here, right into position here. Onto position, into position, whatever. As long as there's a position, it's going there. So we are more or less set here. What I'm going to want to do is I'll put in the back screws first, because those are the ones that are most likely to fall out. In fact, as I turn this, it's going to pull this guy into position. No problem. Pulling, pulling, pulling. Beautiful. Loosen that up a little bit. Now we do the same thing over here. And we tighten, 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 tighten. Pulls that into position. Beautiful. Now, here's the fun part. This is not the tooled side of the pivot. You know, at some level I can see the attractiveness of it, and I can see the desire to rebuild it from one side, but what that means is that this disassembly is a little bit unusual. Because remember, I have this little shelf kind of guy here, and I have this little shelf kind of guy right there. So what I need to be doing is turning the other side here, but I need to do it in such a way that eventually the shelf ends up in the proper position. And that I'm not coming off of the... kind of cross-threaded things. So what I need to do is turn from this side such that it engages with the threads there properly and in the right orientation. Then at a certain point, no, I think I cross-threaded again. Okay. I'm going to kind of pull that back. There we go. Okay. So what I just did there is I backed off a little bit. I unscrewed for a second. Then that let this guy, while applying pressure down, then that let it fall into place when it was properly threaded. So that's good. Now what I'm going to do is sort of... I don't know if you can see this. Yeah, you can see this. There's that little shelf there, and I can rotate the whole thing. And so what I'm going to do here is just press this down just a little bit, and that actually puts the shelf onto the shelf there. Damn, I just lost it again. So I'll rotate until there we go. I can push it all the way down, and then here, fully tightened. So the question here is fully tightened the best approach? So we'll find out. What I'm doing here is just sort of walking it back and forth a little bit. That's partly to spread the lubrication and partly to get things ready. I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to put a little bit of this grease right on the back here. That was a little too much, but again, Exxon Shabazz, what do you freaking want? Yeah, that's a little too much, but at the very least, it'll distribute itself over the back. Yeah, and that smoothed it out a little bit more. I'll clean this out, but not too much. Okay. So the question here is, can I get away with loosening this pivot at all without getting any blade play? Because that might make it a little bit nicer in the pull. I've introduced a little bit of blade play, so I'll tighten this up a little bit more. This might be that, much like the Shabazz, it's designed to run at full tightness. There is no play there, and it is actually a little bit smoother. All right. So there you go. That is your disassembly. At some level, you know, the biggest lesson here is to just use their grease. I tried a bunch of other things. I tried knife pivot lube. I tried the heavyweight nano oil. I even tried the nano grease, and none of them worked as well as this Chris Reeve fluoro grease. Some of you might be saying, of course they didn't, you idiot. That's the manufacturer recommendation. Yeah, sure. Okay, I hear you. Thing is, I actually vastly prefer the action of the Shabazz on other lubrication, so I figured I'd experiment around a little bit. But in this case, I actually do recommend you stick with the manufacturer-required lube. And aside from that, though, the biggest takeaway from this disassembly is that this was a slip joint disassembly, but it actually didn't suck. That was a relatively painless disassembly, all things considered, for a slip joint style knife. And so I very much appreciate that, and it is probably the best thing about this knife, is that it's got that very good ease of disassembly. So anyways, there's your Chris Reeve Knives Impinda disassembly. Hope you found this interesting, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. And keep in mind that this disassembly video airing means that the review is impending. Impending? No? Okay. Hope this has been interesting. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.